a rude and mean-spirited person, someone who's tricksy, is playful or mischievous. To estivate is to spend a hot or dry period in a prolonged state of torpor or dormancy. To peregrinate is to travel or wander from place to place. Elysium is paradise, the abode of the blessed. Your halcyon days were a period in the past that was idyllically happy and peaceful. And then Pirosh threw in a curveball, a word that doesn't exist, sniggly. To sniggle is to fish for eels by thrusting a baited hook into their hiding places. But he simply made up sniggly. Word lovers do that. They invent some too. Read on for more.
So one more reading before we, throw open the floor to questions, because we are coming to the end of our.
I'm sure the audience will have to ask questions.
Time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you might sort of read the first few paragraphs from the chapter Crash Blossoms, which is on page 83, because that's quite fun.
Okay. Some of these only work in writing. I don't know if they'll work very well read aloud, but I'll try.
Okay. Well, if there's something else you'd like to read,
the Indian English.
Yeah.
Chapter?
Sure.
Yeah. So that might be something that will be familiar to folks here. Page 18, yeah. The crash blossoms, by the way, relate to headlines of newspapers, but it tends to be funnier when you see it in print and you see how the mistake could be made. So that's why. Is that right?
Yeah.
Indianisms. I've long immodestly considered myself the inventor of the term prepone. I came up with it at St. Stephen's in 1972, used it extensively in conversation, and employed it in an article in JS magazine soon after. Prepone, as a back construction from postpone, seemed so much simpler to a teenage collegian than clunkily saying, could you move that appointment earlier, or I would like to advance that deadline, or please bring it forward to an earlier date. Over the years, I was gratified to see how extensively its use had spread in India. But I was wrong. In keeping with the long-standing wisdom that there is nothing new under the sun, I was told by Catherine Henstridge of the Oxford English Dictionary, no less, that they have an example of the use of the word prepone from 1913 in the New York Times. It didn't catch on much in the West, but that was in a letter to the editor of the New York Times. It didn't catch on much in the West, but the proceedings of the 1952 Indian Science Congress revealed that other Indians thought along the same lines as me. In Indian villages, quote unquote, demand for power can be preponed or postponed not only by hours but even by days. So clearly the origin of prepone had been preponed from 1972 to 1913, and I duly withdraw my claim to its origination. Mind you, I can still make a case through frequent usage for being somewhat involved in its popularization. Still, the persistence and survival of what's called Indian English, often with a sneer as if to differentiate it from the Queen's proper English, or the King's now, deserves to be taken seriously. Our English spoken without the shadow of Englishman looming over us is a vigorous and local language which draws strength from local roots. If Americans can say fall for autumn and gotten for have got, though both are archaisms in England itself, why can't Indians say furlong, fortnight, and do the needful, even if these have fallen out of use centuries ago in London? So many words in Indian English, including prepone, have stood up to the only test that matters, the test of time and usage. If enough people find a word or phrase useful, it is, to my mind, legitimate. Indian English is a living, practical language used by millions every day for practical purposes. I'm not referring to expressions like satyagraha, namaste, or yogi that have passed into the English language and are used exactly as they are in India. I'm referring to the usage of English words differently in India from the Anglophone West. Many phrases we take for granted in ordinary conversations are quite unusual abroad. Calling elders auntie or uncle, for instance, or using the expression non-veg to convey willingness to eat meat. That doesn't make them wrong or even quaint, it just makes them Indian. Some Indian English was created by our media and passed into regular usage. Air dash, the Chief Minister air dash to Delhi. History sheeter, The police explained that habitual criminal X was a history cheater, i.e. that he had a long criminal record. Some, like my prepone, came from school and college campuses. Mugging, cramming hard for an exam with much rote learning and memorization involved, uses a word that means two very different things to Americans or Brits abroad. To Americans, it's a criminal assault by a robber, as in she was the victim of a mugging in a dark alley. In India, we say mugging when we study for an exam, right? Or, in Britain particularly, it's an elaborate or often comically exaggerated expression, as in he was mugging for the camera. You make a funny expression for the camera, you're mugging. We don't use the mugging in that way in India. When an Indian student tells a foreigner that he was mugging for an exam, bewilderment is guaranteed. Yet it's a vivid word that conveys exactly what is intended for every user of Indian English. So the way Indians speak the English language is often distinctive, but not necessarily incorrect. Some Indian Englishisms are merely translated from an Indian language. What is your good name is the classic, since all Bengalis, for instance, have a dark naam that they're called by, and a bhalo naam or good name for the record. So that's why what is your good name? But what is your good name is still the most polite form in almost any Indian version of the English language for finding out the identity of your interlocutor. Is he your real brother, someone asks? Not to accuse you of having imaginary siblings, but to differentiate this brother from a cousin who's also referred to as a brother by affectionate Indians. That's a cultural assumption, and such cultural assumptions inevitably influence language. The widespread preference for, or at least acceptability of, vegetarianism in India makes Indian English the only language that uses the expression non-veg for meat, fish, and those who consume them. The Indian arranged marriage culture has also had its impact on our local English. Our matrimonial ads have created their own cultural tropes with expressions that only mean something in Indian English. Wheatish complexion, of course. And better still, traditional with modern outlook. Many ads require a prospective bride in India to be homely, that is, home-loving and a good housekeeper. Now, you know that homely in the West means rather plain-looking, but that's not what they mean in India, right? Home-loving and a good housekeeper. And to have passed out, not fainted or lost consciousness, as a Brit or an American might assume, but graduated from a convent school. In other words, a school established by a missionary order where the medium of instruction is English. Some Indianisms are creative uses of ordinary English words or phrases to reflect a particularly Indian sensibility, such as kindly adjust. Said apologetically by the seventh person slipping onto a bench meant for four. We have nothing to apologize about. We should defiantly celebrate their use as integral parts of our Indian English vocabulary. After all, we are like that only. And if you don't like it, kindly adjust. But acknowledging the legitimacy of Indian English and many of its formulations doesn't mean that anything goes. Some things are simply wrong. The Indian habit of saying, I will return back, is an unnecessary redundancy. If you return, you're coming back. I'm more neutral about revert as an Indianism for get back. A correspondent saying, I will revert to you by next week, does not mean, as the English or Americans will think, that he will convert himself into what you used to be. Merely that he will issue a reply. I will revert to you by next week literally means I'll change into who you are, you know. But in India we mean it differently. Since the meaning is clear, objections to its use are unwarranted. But the Desi practice of using till to mean as long as is simply incorrect English. It is wrong to say, I will miss you till you are away, when you really mean, I will miss you till you come back. I'm staying Bandra side is not an acceptable equivalent. I'm living in the Bandra area. And backside for rear causes much unwitting hilarity, as in signs proclaiming entry through backside only. These can't be justified under the rubric of Indian English. They are just bad English. Indians are excessively fond of euphemisms. We would rather use a roundabout way of conveying an interest in a delicate topic rather than use the direct word that foreign English speakers might. Thus, we use reduced as a synonym for losing weight. You've reduced. Your intended, that is, your intended spouse is your would-be in India. A loose character has dubious morals. Women speak of chums for menstrual periods. Chum is an old English slang for pal and must have been applied since those chums are monthly visitors. Asking about good news is a polite way of inquiring about pregnancy. And we speak of issues when we mean children. You've been married for 10 years, any issues? Doesn't mean do you have problems in your marriage, but do you have any children? Cultural assumptions and practices are inevitably reflected in Indian English. You belong to your native place rather than being simply from there. And your native place might be a Mufasal town, that is a rural or provincial area. If you're not in town, you're out of station. If you meet a lady who's elder to you, she's usually auntie even if there is no blood relationship. Relationships matter in India, and so terms are invented for which there is no English equivalent. Thus, your co-brother is your wife's sister's spouse. There is even a term going back to the days when travel beyond our shares was a rare and inordinately expensive privilege for someone who had come back after sojourning abroad. They were foreign returned. And a unique Indian cultural practice gave us the expression, give me a missed call. Meaning, ring me briefly and hang up so your number shows up on my device and I will call you back at my expense when I'm free. The caller might be an impecunious relative who can't afford to pay for the call, or merely a junior who would be seen as presumptuous otherwise. The missed call addresses both these handicaps. Then there are Indian formulations that have nothing to do with cultural sensitivities, but simply reflect the way we apply certain words. You're sometimes required to do the needful. If you do it perfectly, you've achieved 10%, and your friend's thanks is met with mention not, rather than don't mention it. We have a noun, time pass, for activities to while away one's idle moments. We take lunch rather than have lunch. See a picture rather than a movie. Put up somewhere rather than stay there. What foreigners call sunglasses are often cooling glasses, goggles or glares in India. We ask for a cold drink when we want what Americans call soda, and the pompous referred to as an aerated beverage, though the drink may not in fact be cold. Some Indian English expressions emerge from translating phrases in local languages, like eating my head for bothering me, sit on her head for pressure her, I took his class for I scolded him. Others are more modern. An unfamiliar problem is out of syllabus. A good experience is first class. Then there's rubber as a synonym for erase. In the US, a rubber is what you use in bed to prevent a mistake. In the US, you use it in the classroom after you make one. Of course, some Indianisms are just awkward and arguably wrong, like God promise and mother promise to swear upon the divine or your mother, or saying years back rather than years ago. The telephone has brought about other solecisms. Hello, Ramu this side, when you mean Ramu here, or the stranger on the line who says, myself Salman, yourself? I'm tempted to say myself gone and cut the call, that is hang up. So that's the spirit of the book. Enjoy.
That is brilliant, Shashi. Thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so if anyone would like to ask questions, please do so now. That gentleman over there.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're here. You're audible.
Okay. So, my name is Promit Lahiri. I'm a
Yeah, it does kind of break up. The sound is going in and out. Maybe if you come a little closer, perhaps you're too close to the speaker there. That may be why it's breaking. Yeah, thanks. Try.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it could be. Try.
Okay. So, my name is... It's still breaking. Actually.
No, it's not much better. There's another mic coming to you. Sorry, that mic is obviously a problem.
Loud and clear. Okay. So, my name is Promit Lahiri. I'm a LAM fellow, sir.
Oh, hi. So, okay. A lamp is somebody who, not Florence Nightingale with the lamp, but somebody who's a legislative assistant to an MP. So you're working with some MP. Great. Yeah.
So, sir, thank you so much for the talk. It was very nice.
Pleasure.
I actually wanted to know because as a Bengali, we tend to use a lot of onomatopoeias. So
Right.
what is your thought on the use of onomatopoeia?
It's in many Indian languages, certainly in Hindi as well. No? You often use a rhyming word to go with something. Onomatopoeia, of course, refers to the sounds of that you're talking about, and that's there in English as well. But again, it can't always literally translate, right? And it's interesting that the one Indian writer who actually tried to reflect some of these Indian styles in English in occasional passages is Salman Rushdie. So he would constantly, say, I can't now think off the top of my head about a Rushdieism, but something like, what is all this lakshmak you're having? Or, what is, are you in a good mood, should? This kind of thing. That's very typically, in many Indian languages, this echoing sounds to convey something and to reinforce a point. Give me a couple of examples of Bangla onomatopoeia. Hare Baba. Okay. Bhobash. It's said. That's it. Okay. So, most Indian languages have a certain musicality of their own, but these are untranslatable. So in English, English has onomatopoeia, and so, bang, for example, is onomatopoeia, the sound of a bullet shot. Earl Stanley Gardner, when he wrote the Perry Mason books, was always asked why whenever there was any firing in his books, it'd be bang, 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 and not just bang. And he would say, because it's 10 cents a word. Thanks.
The lady in a checked.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Actually, I have a question which is not exactly related to English, but rather about reading. As a reader myself, I often face a problem when I'm reading a text. I tend to associate it with the moral character of the writer. Like, for example, the writer you mentioned, Woodhouse. And to add a few more to the mix, like Virginia Woolf, Kant, maybe Wilde, remarkably different range of writers, but still they seem to have a convenient distaste for the Indian subcontinent, and they somehow use certain ingredients in their writings, like flimsy, pretty nincompoofs for Indian women, and inhabitants of the southern oceans to be considered lazy, as Kant once put. I don't remember the exact quotation. So do you believe that as readers ourselves, we should hold them in contempt for such things, and consider it to be a rather philosophical interplay between morality, or just to take them for their written word and like?
I'm not sure I caught it all. Did you catch that fully? Just give me a
She's
paraphrase.
talking about
No, it was
the
obviously
way certain writers